everyone, welcome back to my channel. If it's your first time, welcome. My name is Nikita and on this channel we focus on diverse reading. So we have a focus on BIPOC stories, BIPOC authors, especially South Asian stories and South Asian authors. So if it's your first time, welcome. You can expect a lot of book chats, book recommendations, as well as video episodes of my podcast called Brown People Problems. It'll definitely be linked down below, so check it out. But for today's video, I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I wanted to share with you 5 things that have helped me become a better reader and hopefully can help you become a better reader as well. So these are just 5 very seemingly basic and seemingly mundane practices that have actually made a huge impact for me. And I wanted to make this video because as I have joined Booktube and just really following even like recommendations from like Book Talk and Bookstagram and whatnot, I have found this a culture of consumerism almost with books where, and I'm not saying everyone is buying into it, but there just generally seems to be this culture of just like binging and reading more and more for the purpose of just wanting to read more and wanting to read, like 100 books a year. And if that works for someone, if, you actually retain what you're reading and connect with what you're reading, then that's great. Who am I to say anything about that? But if you are like me and you have found that there's a lot of pressure to make a TBR and read your TBR and not divert from that and have a certain number of books that you need to read every month, then we're in the same boat. So here are a few strategies that have helped me feel more aligned with what I'm reading and hopefully can be helpful for you too. Also, another reason why we're talking about this, and it's going to be very fiction heavy, because fiction has been shown to increase social acuity, which is basically improved like psychological functioning, positive interpersonal relationships, and we know that reading also helps to reduce stress. Also, in research around emotional intelligence, studies have found that reading helps create a sharper ability to comprehend other people's motivations, obviously creates a lot more empathy and compassion. So reading is super important, and we definitely don't want to try to convince anyone otherwise. And so like I said, if reading like 20 books a month works for you and you genuinely don't feel the pressure and you genuinely feel connected with what you're reading, click out of this video, carry on. But if you'd like to learn some different ways that you can become a mindful reader, better connect with what you're reading, then let's get started. Okay, so my tip number 1, what helps me is pausing and reflecting on what I've just read. So sometimes I'll feel really pressured to maybe finish a book and I'll find myself just rushing through and just my eyes are just skimming over the text and I'm not really absorbing what the text is saying. So what I have found to be helpful at that time is to take a step back, pause, put the book down and reflect. So for fiction, what I found to be helpful is to really ask myself, okay, what was it that drew me to this book in the first place? Because when you are racing against time to finish a book, like you can tend to lose like the sense of purpose with which you started that book. So I always like to ask, what was it that drew me to this book? Why did I pick this book up? Was it a certain character? What were my expectations like? And how am I feeling as I'm reading this book right now, right? So this might be a little bit of the therapist coming out in me, but I think it can be helpful. It's been helpful for me to just check in with myself. How am I feeling as I'm reading this? Am I really retaining anything? Do I need to take a step back? Do I need to take a breath? That's been helpful for me. When it comes to nonfiction, what I found to be helpful is asking myself, how does this fit into my life? So how is this concept that I read fit into my life? How does this book fit into my life? How does the larger message of this book fit into my life? It's a question that I obviously ask myself before I pick any nonfiction book up. is to ask myself, how does it fit into my life? How does it fit into my value system? How do I, if it doesn't fit into my life right now, how do I imagine it's gonna fit into my life a little bit down the road? Or am I just sort of buying this because it's on a bestseller list? Because I have done that. And as I'm reading a nonfiction book as well, to be able to ask myself, how does this fit into my life today? What is it from this chapter, the section that I read, that resonates with me? I find that these like bite-sized moments of reflection can help you just ground yourself with the book and help you actually be present with what you're reading, right? Instead of like being somewhere else with it. So tip number 2, doing some reflection after you're done reading the book. Now this can sound a little bit like, I don't know, maybe what they taught us in school or some people's academic practices. So I can appreciate that it might sound like a little bit like work at first, but what I personally use is I use an app called Notion. So if you've been around YouTube for some time, you've definitely heard everyone talk about this app. It's called Notion. It's essentially just an organizing, I guess, app. And I have a tab called My Book Notes. And I have in here books that are really like 5-star or really, really impactful, and I like to make a tab for them. So I go in, and once I'm done reading the book, I start to reflect on the book. So how would I describe this book in 3 sentences? What were some of my impressions of the book? How did I discover this book? Who should read it? How did the book change me? What were my top 3 quotes? And if I'm feeling really like a perfectionist, then I will get in there and I'll write down summary and notes of all of these books. And that's only if I'm feeling like really like organized. As you can see, like I don't do that with all of my books, like not even close. But there are some books that I'm reading and they're so dense, but they really resonate with me, like The Myth of Normal. So I'll just go in and I'll write down notes for each chapter, so that when I come back to this, if I need to in the future, which I probably will, because there'll be some sort of idea that really resonated with me, I'll come back to it and I'm gonna wanna tap into what I read at that time, or very easily find, a fact or research that I read about. I don't do the summary and notes with my fiction. Makes no sense. For fiction, I will show you my template. So for fiction, my template looks like, what is this book about? How did I discover it? What are some of my thoughts? And who would like it? And pretty simple, right? Just like my thoughts, raw thoughts about this, and my impressions. And I find that this just helps me consolidate what I have just read, because I don't know about you, but if I'm going through a lot of books all at once, I will just forget what I read, or how did the book end? The book that I read 2 weeks ago, how did it end? So I find this organization system, I know it's a little bit extra, but it's really great. If you haven't heard of this app, I will link Notion down below. You can obviously replicate this on any app of choice, I guess. But I believe this was a template that I found online through their free templates that you can download. So I will link it for you down below. All right, tip number 3. I find it very useful with fiction, because again, if I'm just reading fiction to escape, then I may not engage with this. But if I really enjoy what I'm reading, I'll go through this mental exercise where I will ask myself, which character do I resonate most with and why? And which character do I absolutely dislike and why? Again, no need to write anything down, not an insanely long exercise, just a quick check-in, and it really helps me again become really like grounded to what I'm reading. It helps me enjoy it a little bit more, and it helps me like immerse myself into the world. I feel like I'm part of the book and I'm part of the world. All right, tip number 4 that helps me read better. This is something that I picked up from a fellow Canadian YouTuber, Caitlyn de Silva. I will link her channel down below. She does amazing lifestyle content. definitely check her out. Caitlyn, if you're watching this, hello, I'm a big fan. She does this thing where she reads nonfiction in the mornings and then she reads fiction at night, typically. And I love that. And when I saw her talk about it a few months ago, I decided to incorporate that into my practice of reading as well. Because, you know, typically when you wake up in the mornings, you are a little bit more alert, you're a little bit more present, you have more bandwidth to read about new ideas, or if you're reading something nonfiction, to like retain more information. So I started doing that too. So in the mornings when I wake up, if I'm going for a walk, I'll use Audible to listen to my nonfiction that I'm listening to at that time, or I will read the nonfiction that I'm reading at that time, even if it's just for half an hour or 45 minutes before work starts. It helps put me in a productive mood. Usually my nonfiction tends to be related to work anyway. So a lot of self-help, a lot of mental health related books. Currently, if anyone is interested in reading The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate. I've talked a lot about this book. It is massive, but it's amazing. So I'm still working my way through this. And I usually will read this for half an hour in the mornings, and then evening time is reserved for my fictional reading, because then it doesn't feel so much like work. It feels like, all right, like the day's ended, now I can reward myself, now I can relax, I can escape. I found splitting my reading like that actually has been really helpful, and it's gotten me through a lot more nonfiction than I would get through otherwise, because I would never prioritize nonfiction. I would keep buying them and I would keep adding them to my list, but I would not read them. So this tip has been really helpful. Thanks again, Caitlyn. Check out her channel. Okay, and the last tip that has helped me become a better, more efficient, more mindful reader is setting my expectations on my reading. So now this is a curious one. It took some time because the inner perfectionist in me would, you know, pick up like a nonfiction book and would want to read it cover to cover. But it's something that I've talked, another YouTuber talk about. I'm sure you've heard of him, but I'll link him down below. Ali Abdal, he does a lot of productivity and lifestyle content. And he talked about something a few years ago, I believe, where he said, you know, let go of this idea that you have to read every nonfiction book cover to cover. Sometimes it is okay if the book allows, if the structure of the book allows, sometimes it's okay to just go in and like read that chapter or those 5 chapters and come out of it. Like, you got what you needed from that book. Some books, I understand there's more of a continuity to it. Parts are not so easily or so clearly segregated. You want to read it front to back, and that's okay too. But I always found myself never being able to get through nonfiction because I would just become obsessed with this perfectionist way of thinking that, all right, I need to read it like fiction from like start to finish. And I, you know, can't take breaks, or if I got what I needed, I still must finish this book. And when I first heard this from him, it definitely gave me a little bit of an ick. It felt a little wrong to do that. But I was like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna start doing it anyway. And I started it, and it's been really helpful. It's been really helpful bring enjoyment back into reading for me. It's been really helpful in helping me get through nonfictions faster. And actually there isn't a single nonfiction that I've only read like 5 chapters of and I've abandoned. What I have done is so for example, with The Myth of Normal, this one is a better example because it's very nicely segregated into different parts that are not super related to one another. So you can just read this book in chunks. But for example, with this, I found it really helpful to come in, just read like one chunk, which is about like 5 or 7 chapters, and then put it away for some time and read another nonfiction book. And then when I feel like, okay, you know, I'm ready to move on to the next section that he talked about, or maybe like the last section that he talked about makes a lot of sense, I'm gonna read that. Because usually what I've found, and Ali also talks about this, nonfiction doesn't always, sometimes, but doesn't always build on itself. Sometimes the ideas are presented to us in a way where we can pick and choose, like a buffet, you know. I found that tip to be almost life-changing for me, because here's the thing, fiction needs to be always read in sequence. Nonfiction does not. And that's why I think so many fiction readers have a hard time with nonfiction, because you feel like, oh, I gotta go from start to finish. I gotta read it like continuously and I can't skip anything. And you know, I gotta read like the author's note and all of that. And if that's something that you don't mind doing, by all means continue. But I don't think I'm wrong in saying when I say that there's a lot of us who really struggle with that. All right, everyone, that's it. That was very short and sweet, but those are my 5 tips that have helped me not get sucked into this vortex of consumerism around reading. Consumerist reading? Sure, we'll go with that. And yeah, it's helped me not get sucked into that like vortex and really just be a mindful reader. Engage with what I'm reading. I want to be able to remember what I've read when I'm done reading it. I don't want to go back 2 weeks and think, oh wow, I have no idea what happened in this book, because that has happened to me before. So if you find yourself to be in a similar space, then see if you want to try any of these. If any of these resonate with you, let me know down below. If you have additional tips that have worked for you, that have helped you be a better, more mindful reader, more engaged reader, please share them with me. I'm always open to more suggestions. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a little bit different than what I usually do. And if you did, give it a like, give me a comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one.